Hey, hope you're doing well. Andy here from Drive Steady, and in this video I'm reviewing a C7 Corvette Z06 with the Z07 package. So here we go. Being a fan of Corvettes, I'm always excited to be around them and drive them, and this Z06 is no different. I remember when the C7, or the 7th generation of the Corvette, was being revealed in 2014, I was glued to my screen watching the reveal. And after I saw it, I thought it was the pinnacle of Corvette design. And here we are 7 years later, and of course the mid-engine design has also been revealed, and I still think that the C7 generation looks good and will continue to look good into the future. But allow me to take a step back here and take my Corvette Homer hat off and ask myself a question. Is the C7 Corvette Z06 a worthy sports car by today's standards? And what about the used car prices? Z06s similar to this one are going for $60, $70, maybe as high as even $80,000. Are they worth it? I guess we'll find out in this review of the C7 Corvette Z06. So let's start off the review by talking about the exterior design of the C7 Z06. And like the C5 and the C6 that came before it, this one also has a wide body that adds 2.5 inches in the front and almost 3.25 inches in the rear, which is quite significant when you compare it to the narrow body base Stingray model. Now, if you ask for my opinion, this wide body gives the Grand Sport, the Z06, and the ZR1 such a presence and an immediate distinguishable look compared to the base level. Now I know people love the narrow body, but for me it's the wide body 10 out of 10 times. So now let's jump into a little bit more detail about the exterior design or the front end design. Specifically, one thing that I like a lot related to the hood. Now this was new in the C7, and it's related to how the hood completely slopes down when it comes down to the bumper here. Now what this does, it improves the visibility from inside the car significantly, because the Corvette has a pretty long hood, and when you're sitting inside the car it almost feels like there's so much car in front of you. But because of this new design language, it almost feels like a European car, where it seems like the hood is much shorter than it is and overall improves visibility. Alright, so now let's talk about the headlights of the C7 generation, and this was a pretty big departure from the C6. I personally think they look really good and draw a comparison to the Ferrari 458 headlight design because of the string of lights that run alongside of it, but it also has running lights, and the xenon, or the headlight itself, is a xenon bulb. And then wrapping up the front end design, you get a much more aggressive splitter in this Z06 because of that Z07 package. And what the Z07 package adds are these side little winglets here on each side that introduce significantly more downforce on the front end of the car, and more downforce is always great when you've got a track-worthy car like this Z06. Alright, so now we're looking at the side profile of the Corvette Z06, and this is one of my favorite angles of Corvettes, period. And this Z06 just takes it to another level because it's got such an aggressive design, and you can see that by all the cuts and the vents and the slotting that helps for cooling and aerodynamics. But the main reason why I'm showing you this angle is because of the Targa top. For the first time ever, a Z06 is available with a Targa top, and of course there's a convertible version as well. Now in prior generations this never happened because the Corvette didn't have enough structural rigidity with the roof off, but that was significantly improved in the C7, hence why you've got a Targa top in the higher horsepower versions like the Z06. So the way this Targa top operates, there are 3 latches. There's 2 underneath each visor, and there's 1 in the center section of the Targa top. And the Targa top is a breeze to take off. You can easily do this by yourself. The top itself weighs about 10 to 15 pounds, and there's a storage compartment in the trunk, and it snaps right in. It doesn't move around. It's safely secured, and you don't have to worry about it. And this is one of my favorite things about Corvettes in general, is the ability to have a coupe and transform it using this Targa top, when in other models you're pretty much restricted to a coupe or a convertible. Now let's talk about the wheels, tires, and brakes on this Z07 equipped Z06. Now the Z06 has a unique looking wheel compared to the Grand Sport and the ZR1, and I think they look really good. They're all aluminum. They're 19 by 10 in the front. They're 20 by 12 in the rear. They're wrapped around using Michelin Pilot Cup Sport 2 tires. Because this is a Z07 package, you get those Cup 2s, but the owner has decided to swap them out for the regular Michelin tires. They're 285 in the front, 335 in the rear, so you get big meats on this Z06. Next, let's move inside the wheel barrel. Again, because this is a Z07 package car, you get carbon ceramic brakes, and I'm telling you, these things stop on a dime. But know that they're 15.5 inches up front and 15.3 inches in the rear. So you get significant braking and tire performance in this Z07 package. All right, so let's wrap up the exterior design by looking at the rear end, more specifically with this trunk. Now there are three ways of opening the trunk. There's a button on the interior, there's a button on the key, and there's a button right here on top of the license plate. So you push that down, you open the trunk, and you are greeted with a substantial amount of space. Something that would rival sedans, let alone a sports car like the Corvette is. You can see that I've got a couple pieces of camera equipment in here, and there's plenty of leftover storage space. I would say that you could easily fit 2 larger pieces of luggage, more than enough for you to go on a weekend getaway. 2 bonuses about the trunk and how you close it. The first one is that there's a grab handle, so you do not have to put your fingerprints on the exterior paint. Finally, this has a soft closing latch, so you don't have to slam this thing shut. You just use a little bit of force, and it just closes by itself, which is always a nice feature. All right, so let's come a little closer and look a little bit more into the details back here. Because this is a Z07 package car, you get this clear extra piece on the spoiler, which looks really cool when you're looking at it from the inside, and from the outside it adds a lot of aerodynamics for better handling when you're on the racetrack. This is an adjustable piece. There are 4 bolts that you can see here that allow you to move it up or down depending on what type of downforce you like. Now moving to the taillights. Remember when they moved away from oval taillights, they being Chevrolet, and everybody went absolutely berserk? Well, not many people are talking about that anymore, and I think that these clear taillights look really, really nice on the C7 generation of the Corvette. Speaking of the clear taillights, these are exclusive to the Z06 and the ZR1. Now let's move further down and let's talk about the diffuser and of course the exhaust. The diffuser is painted in all black. It runs across the length of the car. It's not too aggressive, so I think it works really well. And then you come down to the humongous exhaust tips on the Z06. And then of course you've got the quad exhaust, which you saw in the C5 and the C6, and you see it continuing here in the C7, but sadly that's now gone in the C8, or at least for now. We'll see if it comes back in the higher horsepower trims. But anyway, let's take a listen to what this Z06 sounds like. right, so there you had a chance to hear the exhaust. Now let's move to the engine. And before doing that, let me show you how the hood opens. It's a clamshell style opening, which looks really cool. Chevrolet has been doing this across multiple generations of the Corvette. All right, now the engine. It's called the LT4. It's a 6.2 liter supercharged V8 engine making 650 horsepower and 650 pounds-feet of torque. Of course, being that it's a Corvette, the transmission is mounted in the back, so it's called a transaxle. You've got two transmission options. First is a 8-speed automatic transmission and then a 7-speed manual. As a reminder, much to the dismay of Corvette owners, this is the last generation you can get a manual transmission in the Corvette. But anyway, as far as 0 to 60 times go in the automatic, it's under 3 seconds, 2.95, which is astounding for a car with this layout, front engine, rear wheel drive, and this much horsepower. And in the manual, it's 3.4, 3.5 seconds, which is still okay because the manual is always more engaging to drive. Okay, next, let's talk about some of the infamous or bad rap the LT4 has with overheating. So Chevrolet decided to make some changes and they raised the supercharger cover inside the supercharger. They put in larger intercooling bricks and they mounted them in a different angle. Now these changes started to occur from the 2017 model year and after, so you'll start seeing that in those generations or those model years of the Z06. Now in addition to that, if you had a 7-speed manual car, you got a secondary oil cooler. In the 8-speed automatic, you don't get that oil cooler. Now Chevrolet says that if you want to track the car, the manual transmission is the one to get, as many owners have kind of confirmed at this point that they don't overheat when they track the 7-speed manual Z06s. But the 8-speed automatic that I drove around town had no overheating issues, so I don't think it's really much of a concern unless you're really going to track it hard. All right, so now I've made it to the interior of the Z06, and Chevrolet made a humongous effort to improve things in here for the 7th generation, because Corvettes have always had this bad rap of having amazing performance for the money, but the interior has been subpar and to some even below average. But I can say that this interior is actually pretty good. Having sat in the C8, of course, this feels a little dated, but overall, for being an interior that's like 7 years old at this point, it still feels relatively modern. It's very clean. This is, of course, a 3LZ package, which is the highest trim level. It's got leather all over the place. But overall, it doesn't creak, it doesn't rattle. This model here is a 4-year-old model. It's a 2017, and it's held up pretty nicely. So as far as the test of time goes, a 4-year-old model looks pretty good. So now let's jump into a little bit more detail. This seat, this is the regular seat. There's also a competition seat, but this one is actually pretty comfortable and it helps aid into the stiff ride that this Z07 has. And I'll talk about that during the driving portion. But the one gripe I have about the seats is the thigh support. They're not as comfortable as I wish they were. I wish they were a little bit wider. I feel them poking into my thighs. And if you're somebody who's larger than I am, then I anticipate that you're going to have a problem sitting in these seats, or at least it's going to be somewhat uncomfortable for you. But overall, beyond that, the seat is actually really comfortable. The heated and cooled seat function that it has are not the best. The 911, the 992 Porsche 911 that I drove recently, those seats are really good, but these are somewhat lacking. They're not the best. Okay, moving to the steering wheel. I like this steering wheel a lot. I actually like the design better than the C8 Corvette steering wheel, because that one's kind of got like this square circle or squircle, as people like to make fun of it with. And this one is actually a traditional shape. It has a flat bottom. I really like the design of this. The steering wheel is a small diameter. It has a decent thickness. Maybe a little bit thicker would have been nice, but I personally prefer thicker steering wheels. But I don't see a reason why this wouldn't satisfy anybody out there. And then moving to the gauge cluster and touching a little bit into the technology in the infotainment screen. The gauge cluster is a hybrid unit. And what do I mean by that? There's there's a center screen that gives you information, and it's flanked by 2 analog gauges. On the right side, you have your supercharger pressure and your gas gauge. On the left side, you have the speedometer. One of my favorite things about the interior of this car is these gauges, and specifically the speedometer and the way the needle hangs. When you're going like 20 or 30 or 40 miles an hour, it's pretty much just hanging at like 6 or 7 o'clock, and it makes it look like the car is going slow. Then you look down, you're going, oh gosh, I'm going the speed limit. So that's one of the things I really like about this. And then touching into the screens or the technology, the infotainment screen is okay. It has decent resolution. The new C8 Corvette is much better, but overall the screen is good. You've got this little screen button here that is somewhat of a gimmick. It gives you more storage space. It comes down and you can put some additional things in there, but overall the infotainment screen is good. It is showing some date. The speed of it isn't the greatest, but it's functional. I'll leave it at that. Next, one thing I really like is the heads-up display. The heads-up display Chevrolet does in the Corvette is absolutely amazing. The reason why I like it so much is because it's simple. It doesn't give me too much information. It just tells me the speed I'm going, and it tells me the gear I'm in, and that's pretty much it. If I wanted more information, it has the ability to give me that. But I like having the option of it just showing me the simple display. I don't like it when heads-up display is just in your way and giving you too much information. So I really like the head-up display here. Now let me come over to the rest of this interior, specifically the center section here. You have the Z06 badge that tells people that you have 650 horsepower and 650 pounds-feet of torque. And then you come down to the transmission selector. So this is an old school style shifter. You just pull it down once in reverse, neutral, drive, and all the way down puts you in manual shifting mode. And then coming down from there, you have the drive mode selector. Now this is what I was talking about, being able to switch through your drive modes. You have Tour, Sport, Track, Eco, and that tailors your driving dynamics as far as your suspension, your throttle response, and even down to your gauge cluster. It changes the look of your gauges as you're toggling through the modes. And then you have an electronic parking brake flanked by 2 fairly decent sized cup holders. You're not going to fit anything large in here. A 16-ounce bottle of water fitting in here totally fine, but anything like a big Slurpee is probably not going to fit in here. Then you've got the center storage section here, which is not very deep. I don't think you can fit a sunglass case in here. You can definitely fit your cell phone in here. You have 2 USB outlets and an auxiliary jack, but overall it's good that it's there as opposed to it not being there. And of course, if this is not enough, like I mentioned, you have the ability to store things behind the infotainment screen. But overall, that's pretty much the interior. I have to say that being that this is a older generation car, it still feels relatively modern in here. There are certain things that you can do to pep it up a little bit. There's the carbon fiber dash option, but like I said, it's functional and it's miles and miles better than anything you would have gotten in the prior generations of the Corvette. So with that, now let's move to the driving portion of the review. All right, so now the driving portion of the review, and you can see that I've taken the Targa top off because it's an absolutely beautiful day outside, and it's just more fun when you drive with the top off anyway. All right, so now the key. It's a rather underwhelming key. You've got these buttons here on this side for opening and closing the door and locking and unlocking, and then on the back side you have the Corvette logo there, but overall it's a bunch of plastic and underwhelming, like I said. I'm not sure why manufacturers don't pay attention to the keys, especially considering that this is a Z06. It's a rather special car. Anyway, now let's talk about visibility. So visibility out the front is actually excellent. And remember at the beginning of the video, I told you how they kind of chiseled the front nose and it drops down. You can really tell between the hood where those angles are. It really helps you see out of the front. Now out of the sides, I can see everything in my peripheral vision. To my left, I can see everything out here. The Corvette does not have any safety features as far as blind spot monitoring and things like that. But but it does have front and rear cameras, so that's very helpful. And there's a common complaint about blind spots in the C7. I personally don't think so. There's like a little peephole that you can see outside of the passenger side. I don't have any issues on my side, and as long as you adjust your mirrors properly, I personally have found no issues with blind spots whatsoever. So as far as pricing goes, now of course you can't buy these new anymore, but surprisingly they're actually reselling at a very high number. This Z06, especially with the automatic transmission, are going around the high $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 range depending on what trim and what packages. But the manual transmissions are actually much rare and command a higher premium. Some of those are no less than $65,000 depending on mileage and year and options, of course. So that's the pricing discussion. Now let's go ahead and turn this thing on and take it for a spin. All right, so foot on the brake, start stop button. The exhaust sounds really good in this car. Okay, seatbelt on. Make sure my microphone's not in the way. Let me move it up here. There we go. All right, so let's get rolling. Okay, now I'm in this parking lot, and as I roll out, I'm going to tell you how the seats counterbalance this suspension. This suspension is actually extremely stiff, and I don't know if it's because of the Z07, but this suspension, you can feel it's really, really stiff. And it's good that the seats are pretty comfortable and they counterbalance that stiffness, because when you're driving it around town like this and it's a smooth surface, it's actually a very comfortable car. But the second you come to an uneven pavement, like I'm about to come to here, there's a little dip. Yeah, oh, see that? I could really feel that dip. Everything comes through into my seat, and I could really feel everything because of how this suspension is set up. Now, as far as the steering wheel goes, now that I've kind of come to a stoplight here, the steering wheel feel is actually very easy to use. Even though I'm in sport mode, it's actually not artificially, I mean, it feels pretty good. Typically what you see is artificial weight, and it's like turning a Mack truck when you're turning a steering wheel nowadays. But I would say that this has a good feel as far as steering goes during day-to-day driving. Now, as far as the steering and the turning radius in this car is actually pretty bad. You cannot make a U-turn in a narrow street. It's just not going to happen, and that's because the wheels, the tires, they're very, very wide in the Z06. But this thing goes like heck. Let me tell you something. It is brutally fast, and I'm trying to get to a straight stretch of road here. But while I'm waiting, this Targa top experience is actually really, really good. I like it a lot. And it's telling me I have worn brakes, but the owner told me that that's a sensor issue. That's something to keep in mind. The owner told me that there's sensor issues with the brakes. Now, I just got it in my infotainment system saying that the brakes are worn, but the owner told me that they're absolutely not worn. There's a little sensor, and it costs like $1,000 apparently to change out. And he said, you know what, forget it. My brakes are good. Don't worry about it. Let me get out of here. Here we go. Man, it really loses the back end out really quickly. Let me turn here. Little straight stretch of road. Let's see how it does. Floor it. Wow, it is very, very fast. Woo! It's making me a little nervous. This thing gets very, very happy. Tail happy is an understatement. It is, wow, you really have to be careful with your throttle in this car. It is very, very happy with the throttle, to say the least. You have to keep your foot down, or else you see those videos where the car starts to lose it and people lift and the car ends up in a ditch. You really have to use your steering wheel to keep this thing in place. But I can tell you, this thing is unbelievably fast. I also drove it on the highway prior to this video, and this thing just eats speed. It is like, speed is not even a thing for the Z06. It is so unbelievably, remarkably fast. Like, I drove the Hellcat, and this, wow, this is just, it makes the Hellcat feel slow. And I don't know if it's because of the weight. This thing weighs about 3,500 pounds, and the Hellcat is almost like 4,000 pounds. But this is a remarkably fast car. It is truly unbelievable how fast this car is, and I'm rambling on about the speed. So let's move on, and let me get back to the transmission. So the transmission is great during day-to-day driving if you're just putting it around. It is true, the paddle shifters are a little slow. You pull on it, it doesn't give you the gear immediately. Either in upshifts or in downshifts, it's kind of slow when you're using the paddles. Here's an example. So I'm in third gear. Let me downshift. Pull. I just got it. So pull again. See that? I just got the gear. There's definitely a lag. Overall, this car is just a remarkable car. As far as the first two questions that I asked during the beginning of the video, does this car hang, I guess, or fit in with today's supercar standards? I think it absolutely does. I mean, this car is blisteringly, there's a plane flying over me. This car is blisteringly fast. It handles really, really well. Once you're going, it's totally point and shoot. The traction is an issue. You got to make sure you have the right traction. But overall, from a performance standpoint, there is no doubting this Z06. Man, is it an unbelievable car to drive. It's very fun. Would it have been better with a manual? Yes. It does have a shortcoming with the automatic, but overall, the speed and the acceleration, the exhaust sound is very, very good. You have to make sure you keep your foot on the throttle. You can't lift. Never lift, or else you'll be in trouble. Keep your foot on the gas. It finds traction. You just got to keep your foot on the gas. All right, that's enough. You guys get the picture. The Corvette is an absolutely remarkable car. It has such a significant place in sports car history and in sports cars today. Why? Because it's a value proposition. It is a blistering performance car, and it has the dual nature characteristic of being able to drive it on a day-to-day basis. That is why the Corvette is such a remarkable and significant car in the car world. And this Z06 is no different. It follows that same philosophy. Is it worth $70,000? I don't know, it depends. But if you're after a car that's a two-seater and that's a full-on sports car, that's blisteringly fast, that's comfortable to drive on a day-to-day basis, I mean, you really got to go Porsche 911 if you're not going to get a Corvette. But that's really all I got to say about this amazing car. If I haven't answered any of your questions, please feel free to send me one down in the description below, or just send me a DM on Instagram at DriveSteady. So, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.